Welcome to another episode of Unsolved Cases. I'm your host, Larry Hunter, and today we're diving deep into one of the most controversial theories surrounding Hollywood's most infamous unsolved murder. Picture this: January 15th, 1947. A vacant lot on Norton Avenue in Los Angeles. A horrific discovery that would shock the world and create a mystery that still captivates us nearly 8 decades later. The brutal murder of Elizabeth Short, known forever after as the Black Dahlia, remains one of America's most notorious unsolved cases. But what if I told you that for over 70 years, we've been looking at the wrong suspect? What if the real killer was hiding in plain sight? A respected physician with connections to the art world, living in a mansion on Franklin Avenue, who may have turned murder into his own twisted masterpiece. Today, we're exploring the dark shadows surrounding Dr. George Hill Hodel, a man whose name appeared in Elizabeth Short's address book, who became entangled in one of the most intensive surveillance operations in LAPD history, and who may have fled the country just as investigators were closing in. This isn't just another true crime story. This is a tale of corruption, cover-ups, and a potential serial killer who might have gotten away with the perfect crime. If true crime mysteries like the Black Dahlia murder, the Zodiac killings, and the Lindbergh kidnapping send a chill down your spine, then Unsolved Cases by Scoob is your next addiction. Designed for busy lives, these fast, binge-worthy episodes deliver haunting cases and unforgettable twists. Anytime, anywhere. Welcome to Scoob, the AI-powered podcast app with over 100,000 minutes of intense true crime content and a growing community of 50,000-plus fans across the country. Download Scoob now from the App Store or Google Play and immerse yourself in the world of true crime like never before. Now, coming back to the Black Dahlia murder, let's begin where it all started, that vacant lot on Norton Avenue. When Elizabeth Short's body was discovered on that cold January morning, it wasn't just the brutality of her murder that shocked investigators. It was the precision, the almost surgical nature of how her body had been positioned. Elizabeth's arms were placed in a very specific manner, elevated overhead with the right arm angled away from her body at 45 degrees, then bent at the elbow to form a 90-degree angle. The left arm mirrored this exact configuration. Her body had been cut in half at the waist, and there was a gruesome laceration across her face that turned her mouth into a distorted, grotesque grin. To most investigators, this appeared to be the work of a madman. But what if it was something else entirely? What if this wasn't random violence, but a carefully orchestrated piece of performance art? A sick tribute to the surrealist movement that was captivating the art world of the 1940s. The positioning of Elizabeth's body, as we'll discover, bears a striking resemblance to specific works by the renowned surrealist artist Man Ray. But more on that later. For now, let's focus on how this crime scene would eventually lead investigators to a most unlikely suspect. The killer wasn't done with Elizabeth Short after her death. In the days following the discovery of her body, the Los Angeles Police Department received something that would electrify the investigation: a package containing Elizabeth's personal belongings. The package arrived at the LAPD, carefully cleaned with gasoline to remove fingerprints. Inside were Elizabeth's purse and shoes, items that had been missing from the crime scene. But the most significant discovery was her address book. A small, leather-bound book that would become what Captain Donahoe called dynamite. This address book represented hope. Perhaps it would finally reveal what had happened during Elizabeth's mysterious missing week, those critical 5 days between January 9th, when she was last seen at the Biltmore Hotel, and January 15th, when her body was found. When investigators opened that address book, one name immediately caught their attention. There, prominently embossed in gold on the cover, was a name that would change the entire direction of the investigation: Dr. George Hodel. But who was Dr. George Hodel? And how did a respected physician living on Fountain Avenue become connected to one of Los Angeles's most brutal murders? Dr. George Hill Hodel was not your typical suspect. He was an accomplished physician operating a clinic on East First Street near Alameda. He lived at 5121 Fountain Avenue and was known to frequent the Biltmore Hotel, the same hotel where Elizabeth Short was last seen alive. Hodel was a man of sophisticated tastes, particularly when it came to art. He was deeply fascinated by the surrealist movement and held a profound admiration for the works of Man Ray, the American artist who had become a leading figure in the Dadaist and surrealist movements. But Dr. Hodel's life was far from pristine. By 1949, he was facing a whirlwind of legal troubles. He was under investigation for tax evasion, alleged illegal abortion practices, and even suspected communist affiliations. Most seriously, he was facing charges of molesting his own daughter, 15-year-old Tamar Hodel. It was during this molestation trial that Dr. Hodel's name would first be publicly connected to the Black Dahlia case. And it happened in the most unexpected way possible. Sometimes, the smallest decisions have the most devastating consequences. In Dr. Hodel's case, it was his lawyer's attempt at humor that would thrust him into the center of the Black Dahlia investigation. During the trial concerning the molestation charges, Hodel's defense attorney, Robert Neeb, made what he thought was a clever joke. In an attempt to highlight what he saw as the absurdity of Tamar Hodel's accusations against her father, Neeb invoked the infamous Black Dahlia murder case as a comparison. This was intended as a satirical gesture, a way to suggest that the daughter's accusations were as outlandish as claiming her father was responsible for Hollywood's most notorious unsolved murder. But the joke backfired spectacularly. For the first time, it forged a public association between George Hodel and Elizabeth Short's murder. The jury ultimately acquitted George Hodel on all charges of incest, deliberating for less than 4 hours. But despite this legal exoneration, there were whispers of misconduct within the district attorney's office. Rumors circulated about a possible payoff, orchestrated by Hodel's defense attorney, Jerry Giesler, that may have influenced the verdict. The prosecution's case had appeared compelling, yet Hodel walked free. This left deep dissatisfaction within the DA's office, and some individuals there harbored an underlying desire for retribution against Hodel. Neeb's courtroom joke had given them the perfect avenue for their vendetta. Now, let's delve into one of the most chilling aspects of this case, the potential connection between the Black Dahlia murder and the art of Man Ray. When investigators began looking into Dr. Hodel's background, they discovered his profound admiration for surrealist art, particularly the works of Man Ray. This led to a thorough analysis of Man Ray's photographs and paintings, and what they found was deeply disturbing. Two of Man Ray's works stood out: a painting called Les Amoureux, The Lovers, and a renowned photograph entitled The Minotaur, created in 1936. Les Amoureux presents a striking image with a pair of lips symbolizing bodies intimately entwined, stretching panoramically across the horizon. But it was the Minotaur that provided the most chilling parallel to Elizabeth Short's murder. The Minotaur depicts an allegorical victim of the mythical beast, a creature with the head of a bull and the body of a man. In Greek mythology, this Minotaur was confined within a labyrinth on Crete, where it sustained itself on young maidens offered as tribute. Man Ray's photograph shows a nude woman's upper torso with her arms elevated overhead. The positioning is very specific. The right arm angled away from her body at 45 degrees, then bent at the elbow to form a 90-degree angle, while the left arm mirrors this configuration. This arrangement recreates the horns typically associated with the bull-headed Minotaur. Now, remember how Elizabeth Short's body was positioned when it was discovered. Her arms were placed identically to those in Man Ray's Minotaur, effectively emulating the portrayal of the horns found in the original artwork. But the parallels don't end there. The woman's torso in the Minotaur is cut off at the waist, focusing solely on her upper body. If you imagine the breasts as the creature's eyes and the shadow above the stomach as a mouth, you can visualize the face of the beast being superimposed onto the body of its prey. Elizabeth Short's body was also cut in half at the waist. Additionally, there was an excision of flesh beneath Elizabeth's left breast that mirrors the shadow beneath the breasts in Ray's portrayal. Perhaps most disturbing of all, the gruesome laceration across Elizabeth Short's face, which turned her mouth into a distorted grin, bears a haunting resemblance to the elongated lips in Les Amoureux. If this connection is real, it suggests that Elizabeth Short's killer wasn't just a murderer. He was an artist creating a horrifying masterpiece. The assailant seemingly endeavored to construct an unusual, yet meticulously planned tableau, rendering Elizabeth's death an appalling work of art, intended to achieve infamy within criminal history. As an artist or avenger, the killer transformed her body into a canvas and used surgical instruments as paintbrushes. This would represent a deliberate homage to Man Ray, with the killer casting himself as the Minotaur, the malevolent creature consuming the young maiden, Elizabeth. Breakthroughs in cold cases often come from unwavering dedication and the persistence to revisit even the smallest details. It's a continuous journey of discovery, where every piece of information, no matter how old, has the potential to unlock the truth. If this episode got you thinking like a true detective, hit like, follow, and subscribe to Unsolved Cases on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and YouTube. The next breakthrough could be just a listen away. By early 1950, the district attorney's office had launched an intense investigation into Dr. George Hodel. From February to March 1950, Lieutenant Frank Jemison and his investigative team implemented what would become one of the most comprehensive surveillance operations in LAPD history. They meticulously tracked Hodel's movements, following his black Packard car to various art galleries throughout the city. But their most invasive tactic was the installation of surveillance equipment in Hodel's Franklin Avenue mansion. They literally bugged his house. For approximately 6 weeks, from mid-February to the end of March 1950, Jemison's team attentively monitored and recorded everything that happened inside Hodel's home. They installed microphones in the basement and maintained round-the-clock surveillance. What they captured was a cacophony of sounds: loud music, the recital of erotic poetry, numerous flushing lavatories, and boisterous sexual activities. But they also recorded something far more disturbing. George Hodel was well aware he was being watched. The daily recordings captured his agitated directives to his housekeeper to uncover the hidden bug. He was certain that their conversations and activities were being surveilled, and he was deeply disturbed by it. But despite this awareness, Hodel made statements that would haunt investigators for decades to come. During the surveillance operation, investigators claimed to have recorded Dr. Hodel making what appeared to be an admission of guilt. The statement that would echo through the decades was chilling. "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." Steve Hodel, George's son and a former LAPD officer, would later interpret this as a confession to murder. But was it really? At the time these recordings were made, George Hodel was under investigation for multiple serious allegations: tax evasion, illegal abortions, alleged communist ties, and the suspicious death of his secretary. Given his extensive media exposure and his awareness that he was a suspect in the Dahlia murder, it was perhaps logical for Hodel to reference these allegations during phone conversations. More importantly, the transcripts revealed that Hodel was aware of being bugged. He was actively searching for listening devices and instructing his housekeeper to look for hidden recording equipment. Would a person aware of surveillance candidly confess to such a heinous crime over the phone? The surveillance operation also captured other deeply disturbing events. On February 18, 1950, officers documented an incident where a woman was heard crying and making a call to a telephone operator. This was followed by screams, the sound of blows from what seemed like a pipe, more screams, and then silence. Subsequent sounds of digging were discerned in the basement, accompanied by Dr. Hodel telling another man, later identified as Baron Ernst Haringa, something about leaving no trace. Astonishingly, despite monitoring these events from just 5 minutes away, the officers did not intervene. If what they heard was real, and Dr. Hodel had committed murder while under active surveillance, it would have led to the downfall of both the district attorney and LAPD leadership for failing to act. While the surveillance continued, investigators were also examining Dr. Hodel's personal connections and gathering witness statements. What they found was a complex web of relationships and conflicting testimonies. An acquaintance named Lillian Lenorak, who lived with Hodel, stated that he frequently visited the Biltmore Hotel and identified a photograph of Elizabeth Short as one of Hodel's girlfriends. This seemed to establish a direct connection between Hodel and the victim. But Lenorak's credibility became questionable when she was later committed to the state mental institution in Camarillo. This raised serious doubts about the reliability of her testimony. Tamara Hodel, George's 15-year-old daughter, provided another piece of potentially damaging information. She relayed that her mother, Dorothy Hodel, mentioned that her father had been out all night at a party during the time of the murder. More significantly, Tamara recalled her father saying, "They'll never be able to prove I did that murder," a statement that suggested potential guilt, though it was indirect. However, other witnesses painted a different picture. Rudolph Walters, who was familiar with both Elizabeth Short and Dr. Hodel, asserted he had never seen Hodel with Short and doubted they had ever met. Several other acquaintances of Hodel were interrogated, but none succeeded in linking him to the murder. Among the evidence collected was a photograph from Hodel's personal effects, depicting him nude alongside a nude model named Maddie Comfort. When questioned, Comfort mentioned having been with Hodel prior to the murder, but noted that she knew nothing of Hodel's involvement with Elizabeth Short. The investigation was thorough, but it was also revealing significant gaps in the case against Dr. Hodel. On March 27, 1950, something unprecedented happened. Despite being under intensive surveillance by an 18-member detective team maintaining round-the-clock watch, Dr. George Hodel managed to evade them completely and left the country permanently. How does someone escape from such intensive surveillance? The answer reveals the dysfunction within the investigation itself. There appeared to be a complete lack of coordination between the district attorney's office, which was conducting the surveillance, and the LAPD, which was supposed to be handling the case. George Hodel simply vanished. He fled to the Philippines and never returned to face questioning about the Black Dahlia murder or any of the other allegations against him. But what happened to all the evidence? What happened to the recordings, the surveillance logs, the witness statements, and all the documentation from this intensive investigation? By 2004, when LAPD detectives were asked about the Hodel investigation, they found virtually nothing in their files. There was only a single-page memo referencing Dr. Hodel's work at his residence. Nothing about the extensive surveillance conducted by Lieutenant Jemison. All documentation and recordings had inexplicably vanished from LAPD files. This disappearance of evidence raises serious questions about what really happened in 1950. Was this simply poor record-keeping, or was it something more sinister? To understand what might have happened to the evidence, we need to look at the internal politics of the LAPD in 1950. There was a significant power struggle taking place within the department that would have far-reaching consequences. Deputy Chiefs William Parker, who was leading internal affairs, and Thad Brown, Chief of Detectives, were vying to become the next Chief of Police. Thad Brown had initially secured the majority of Police Commission votes, 3-2, positioning him to become chief by July 1950. However, just before the final vote, Police Commissioner Mrs. Curtis Albro died unexpectedly. This left the commission in a deadlock with 2 votes each for Parker and Brown, throwing the election for the new chief into uncertainty. This power struggle may have contributed to the dysfunction in the Hodel investigation. With the leadership of the LAPD in flux, coordination between different divisions and with the district attorney's office may have suffered. Lieutenant Jemison later documented that he was instructed to close the investigation by his superior, H. Leo Stanley, and to transfer all collected reports and interviews to LAPD commanders Thad Brown and W. A. Wharton. But somehow, these files never made it into the permanent LAPD records. This suggests that the disappearance of the evidence wasn't accidental. It was deliberate. The Black Dahlia murder wasn't the only unsolved case that investigators were connecting to Dr. George Hodel. Just 26 days after Elizabeth Short's body was discovered, another brutal murder shocked Los Angeles: the killing of Jean French, known as the Red Lipstick Murder. On February 10, 1947, Jean French's body was found in a vacant lot just 7 miles west of where Elizabeth Short had been discovered. The similarities between the two crimes were striking and suggested they might be the work of the same killer. Both women's bodies were found in vacant lots, and the location of the crime scenes formed a direct parallel line, suggesting deliberate placement by the perpetrator. Both victims had endured brutal attacks, though Jean French's was marked more by physical assault rather than the meticulous torture inflicted upon Elizabeth Short. Foot and heel marks were left on various parts of Jean French's body, including her face, breasts, and hands. Her mouth was grotesquely cut in a manner similar to Elizabeth Short's, creating what investigators described as a werewolf appearance. LAPD Captain Donahoe revealed that the injuries to Jean French were consistent with her being bludgeoned by a heavy object, potentially a tire iron or wrench, as she knelt on the highway. A large blood pool discovered on the highway indicated that the body had been dragged to its final location in the lot. But perhaps the most significant connection was the message left on Jeannie French's body. Written in red lipstick across her torso were the initials BD, which many investigators believed stood for Black Dahlia. Witness accounts further connected Dr. Hodel to French's murder. At the Piccadilly Drive-In on Sepulveda Boulevard, waitress Tony Manolatos served Jeanne her final meal. She observed Jeanne in the company of a dark-haired man with a small mustache, a description that matched Dr. Hodel perfectly. The pair left the restaurant together, and Jean's body was later found just 15 blocks away. Dr. Newbar, who conducted the autopsy, determined that Jean French's murder occurred between midnight and 4 a.m. on February 10th, a timeline that aligned with her last known sighting with the mysterious man. Captain Jack Donahoe was the LAPD officer who initially led the investigations into both Elizabeth Short's and Jean French's murders. He was the one who declared that Elizabeth Short's address book would be dynamite, and he was among the first to publicly connect the two cases. But Captain Donahoe paid a price for his dedication to these cases. He was relieved from his duties approximately 10 days after formally acknowledging the connection between the two murders. When Thad Brown, the chief of detectives, commented on Donahoe's retirement, he expressed a deep sense of loss, saying he had lost his right hand. What happened next was a tragedy that continues to haunt the Black Dahlia case to this day. On the morning of June 18, 1966, at precisely 11:21 a.m., Captain Jack Donahoe made a devastating decision. While sitting in his living room, he took his service revolver, placed it over his heart, and fired. The official cause of death was listed as a gunshot wound to the chest that perforated the heart and aorta, resulting in massive hemorrhage. The motivations behind this tragic act by a highly respected senior command officer remain shrouded in mystery. Whether it was due to illness, depression, or perhaps guilt over what he knew about the Black Dahlia case, we may never know. If he left behind any note or explanation, it has long been lost to time. But the timing of his suicide, nearly 20 years after the murders, raises disturbing questions. Was Captain Donahoe carrying the burden of knowledge about a cover-up? Did he know something about the real killer that he was never able to reveal? The evidence suggests that by the end of 1949, a significant number of people within law enforcement knew about Dr. George Hodel's connection to the Black Dahlia case. This wasn't a secret held by just a few investigators. It was known throughout the upper echelons of both the LAPD and the District Attorney's Office. According to the records, at least 28 people were aware that Dr. Hodel was considered the prime suspect in both Elizabeth Short's and Jean French's murders. This included Chiefs William Wharton, William Parker, and Thad Brown, Detectives Finis Brown and Harry Hansen, District Attorney Simpson, Bureau of Investigation, Chief H. Leo Stanley, Chief Investigator Lieutenant Frank Jemison, and all 18 grand jury members who heard the evidence. Despite this widespread knowledge, Dr. Hodel was never arrested, never formally charged, and was allowed to flee the country. How is this possible unless there was a deliberate decision to let him go? The theory that emerges from the evidence is that certain members of law enforcement, possibly believing their actions were in the department's best interest, orchestrated a cover-up. This cover-up may have been motivated by several factors. First, if Dr. Hodel had been arrested after making incriminating statements during surveillance, it would have revealed that law enforcement had failed to act when they potentially witnessed other crimes being committed. This could have led to the downfall of District Attorney and LAPD leadership. Second, Dr. Hodel was connected to powerful people in Los Angeles society. His arrest might have exposed corruption within the police department and the District Attorney's office, corruption that some people were willing to go to great lengths to protect. Third, the investigation had revealed connections between Dr. Hodel and an illegal abortion ring that may have involved other prominent figures in Los Angeles. Pursuing the case against Hodel might have opened up a much larger scandal. Despite all the speculation and theory, what was the actual evidence against Dr. George Hodel? When we examine the case objectively, the evidence is surprisingly thin. Yes, his name appeared in Elizabeth Short's address book, but this alone doesn't prove he knew her personally. The address book could have contained the names of many people Elizabeth had never actually met. 2 women from Hodel's circle claimed that he knew Elizabeth Short, but numerous other witnesses, including his former wife and Elizabeth's close friends and family members, denied any connection between them. Elizabeth's mother, sister, confidant Ann Toth, her roommates, and even Mark Hansen. None of them recognized any doctor among her known acquaintances or boyfriends. The supposed confession recorded during surveillance was ambiguous at best. Given that Hodel knew he was being monitored and was facing multiple allegations, his statement could easily be interpreted as sarcasm or frustration, rather than an admission of guilt. The physical evidence connecting Hodel to the crime was non-existent. There were no ties established between him and Leimert Park, where Elizabeth Short's body was discovered, no connection to the Astor Motel, and no link to the location where her personal items were found. Furthermore, Hodel's physical condition at the time raises questions about his ability to commit such a crime. He had returned from China in 1946 due to a major heart attack and spent September and October in the hospital recovering. This casts doubt on his physical capability to carry out such a brutal murder. Even his car was wrong. Hodel drove a black Packard, not the Ford that witnesses associated with the crime scene. Perhaps the most significant piece of evidence against Dr. Hodel was supposed to be the recorded statement, "Supposin' I did kill the Black Dahlia. They couldn't prove it now. They can't talk to my secretary anymore because she's dead." But when we examine this statement in context, it becomes far less incriminating. At the time the recording was made, George Hodel was under investigation for multiple serious crimes. He was facing allegations of tax evasion, illegal abortion practices, communist affiliations, and the suspicious death of his secretary. He was also well aware that he had become a suspect in the Black Dahlia murder, thanks to his lawyer's ill-conceived joke during his molestation trial. Given his extensive media exposure and his knowledge that he was being investigated, it would be natural for him to reference these allegations during conversations. More importantly, the transcripts revealed that Hodel knew he was being bugged. He was actively searching for listening devices and instructing his housekeeper to find the hidden recording equipment. Would someone who knew they were being monitored really confess to murder over the phone? The statement reads more like the bitter observation of a man who felt he was being railroaded by the authorities. A sarcastic comment about how anything could be pinned on him, regardless of his actual guilt or innocence. So where does this leave us in our understanding of the Black Dahlia case and Dr. George Hodel's role in it? The evidence suggests that George Hodel was never really a prime suspect in the original investigation. He became a suspect primarily because of his lawyer's courtroom joke, which gave the district attorney's office an opportunity to pursue a vendetta against him following his acquittal on molestation charges. The surveillance operation and investigation that followed were extensive, but ultimately revealed no solid evidence connecting Hodel to Elizabeth Short's murder. The supposed confession was ambiguous, the witness testimony was contradictory, and there was no physical evidence linking him to the crime. Yet the case against Hodel has taken on a life of its own, fueled by his son Steve Hodel's books and the mysterious disappearance of the investigation files from LAPD records. The fact that George Hodel fled the country and was never questioned about the murders has only added to the speculation. But perhaps the most disturbing aspect of this story isn't whether George Hodel was guilty or innocent. It's what the case reveals about the dysfunction and possible corruption within Los Angeles law enforcement in the 1940s and 1950s. The disappearance of evidence, the apparent cover-up, the power struggles within the LAPD, and the tragic suicide of Captain Donahoe all point to a system that was more concerned with protecting itself than with solving one of the most brutal murders in Los Angeles history. The artistic connection to Man Ray's work remains one of the most chilling aspects of the case. Whether or not George Hodel was involved, someone carefully positioned Elizabeth Short's body to mirror surrealist artwork, suggesting a killer with sophisticated artistic knowledge and a deeply disturbed mind. The Black Dahlia case remains officially unsolved, and despite decades of investigation and speculation, we may never know the truth about what happened to Elizabeth Short in January 1947. But the story of Dr. George Hodel serves as a reminder that sometimes the most compelling suspect is not necessarily the right one, and that the search for justice can be compromised by human failings and institutional dysfunction. The shadows surrounding this case continue to conceal the truth, just as they did over 70 years ago when a young woman's brutal murder shocked Los Angeles and created a mystery that continues to haunt us today. I'm your host, Larry Hunter, and this has been Unsolved Cases. Thank you for joining me for this deep dive into the Dr. George Hodel theory. The Black Dahlia case remains one of America's most enduring mysteries, and while we may never have all the answers, we can continue to examine the evidence and ask the difficult questions about justice, truth, and the price of secrets. If this episode fired up your curiosity or left you with questions, make sure to like, follow, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Apple Podcasts, Spotify, YouTube, or wherever you're listening right now. Until next time, remember that behind every cold case are real people whose stories deserve to be told, and whose quest for justice should never be forgotten.